welcome everybody to a very beautiful Saturday morning. It's been a long time since we've had this many people, I think, in the room here. And so it's good to see people actually show up in person. And it's a beautiful day, sunshine, no snow, so that's all a good thing. Well, as Willem said, everything really gets back to analog eventually. We're analog individuals. The universe is really analog. And what we do in ham radio and in other digital operations is we take the analog world, we convert it into ones and zeros, and then we transmit those ones and zeros over some sort of medium in some sort of way, and then turn it right back into an analog image or an analog audio, or what we're going to talk about today is the written text, analog text. And that's where Winlink comes in. Winlink is a way for us to send messages to each other. As human beings, we're very communicative animals. We like to communicate with one another. And when radio was first developed back in the early 1900s, one of the very first things that hams would do is send messages. That was just a natural thing to do, right? That's what we do. It's just kind of within us to send messages between ourselves. So we've been doing this for a very long time as amateur radio operators. And so it's something that has started at the very beginning, has continued to this day. And so we still do it. And Winlink is just one way of sending messages between people and between amateur radio operators. Now there's two types of messages, basically. There's formal messages and there's informal messages. You can think of an informal message as like a post-it note on your refrigerator. Be sure to feed the cat. I need this for the grocery store, whatever. And then a formal message is more like a formal letter where you have a salutation and the text and the signature at the bottom and so forth. So there's a little difference between the different types of messages that we send. Most of us have smartphones these days. Informal messages would be akin to sending a text message. It's kind of an inferred who it's going to and who it's from, because obviously you're sending it to a particular person. And then sending an email would be more like a formal message where you're going to have a to, a from, a subject, and the body text and so forth. So we kind of differentiate between these two types of messages. Winlink is a formal message system. It's not used for just general texting. It's used for formal messages. So it's going to have a to, it's going to have a from, it's going to have a subject, it's going to have text, and it's going to usually have a signature at the bottom of the person who sent it. And it's going to have a date and a time stamp. All right. Anybody familiar with these? Yeah, good. Anybody not familiar? Have you never seen these before? It's not in green and yellow. Sometimes you'll see it in green and yellow. These are called radiograms. When hams first started sending messages, it wasn't too long after they started that capability that somebody decided we need to formalize this a little bit. And they came up with radiograms. The ARRL came up with their radiogram form. And Doug's right. They used to be, I think, on green paper or yellow paper or something like that. Yeah. So they kind of advanced. Now we're just kind of plain old white because a lot of it's done on computers now. And so we really don't need the color paper. But radiograms were a way to formalize sending messages over ham radio. We still use it today. And this is a very good way to actually send concise messages to somebody. Now, sending this radiogram takes some skill. It takes you learning how to do this either over voice or over CW. If you look at that, if somebody looks at that right there, you go, oh, gee, what is that? What's precedence? What do I put in there? What's this HX thing that I put in there? What's that mean? So you have to learn what these things are, and then you have to learn how to actually send this information. Why do you have those lines there on those little boxes? What does that mean? So radiograms, intuitively to most of us, if we don't do it all the time, seem a little bit odd, right? It's just not something that's very intuitive to us. Now, Willem is an expert at these things, I'm sure, and he sees these all the time, and he could probably sit down and tell you exactly how to do all these radiograms, how to send it over voice, and how to send it over CW. But these are very specialized nets, and you need to learn how to do it in order to take advantage of it. So it's something we're not just super familiar with. Whoops, sorry, wrong way. In contrast, how many people are familiar with this? Probably everybody. Maybe too much, right? Those of us who are still working, most of us probably use Outlook in our jobs, and we probably get too many emails, and we'd love to probably not see it very often. Gmail, a lot of us use Gmail, Yahoo Mail, whatever it may be. These are very familiar to us, right? These are formal messages as well, and we do this all the time, every single day, for most of us. And you basically just type in the to, the from, the subject, the body text, and what do you do at the end? You just click send, right? Well, where does that message go? When you hit send, where does it go?
Right here. It's looking right into the side. People can't hear it.
No. Thank you, sir.
Maybe. Come on. Try that.
Okay, so when you hit that send on your email, where does it go? It goes to a server somewhere. I know Chris knows. It goes to a server somewhere. You don't care, really, right? But usually going to go to a Microsoft Exchange server. Google has their own mail servers. Yahoo has their own mail servers, and so forth. So it's going to go over the internet into the cloud, and it's going to sit out there in the cloud. And it's going to then be delivered to the person that you sent it to, who also hopefully has an email address, obviously, or it's not going to work. So this is something we're very familiar with. Everybody can learn this. We all do it all the time. So that's the advantage of Winlink, because Winlink is an email type messaging system. It's not like the radiogram, although you can send radiograms over Winlink, which we'll kind of look at here shortly. But it's really a formal way to send a message in the email format. In fact, in the very logo of Winlink, it says radio email, global radio email. Well, that right there tells you pretty much what Winlink is. It's a way to send emails via radio. So this is what a Winlink Forum looks like when you go in to create a message. Looks very familiar, right? Nothing hard about this at all. Doesn't take somebody long to learn this in the least. This is very simple. To, from, and subject matter. You can attach files if you want to with Winlink, just like you can in Outlook or Gmail. And then you put in the body of the text. And very simple. So Winlink, that's one of its big advantages, is it's very easy to learn how to send a message, how to compose and send that message, especially compose. Sending gets a little bit more difficult because remember in Outlook or in Gmail, what do you do when you're through typing? You just hit send, you walk away. Well, with Winlink, when you type in your message, what do? There's no send button up here, so what happens to that message? What you have to do is you post it to the outbox. And then you'll see that up at the very top, there's a post to outbox. And you just click on that, and it goes into your outbox, but it just sits there, does nothing. It's not automatically going to go do anything. You have to tell it what to do. So that's one difference, and that's where it gets a little bit trickier than just doing an email through Outlook or Gmail. You actually have to sit down and think, how am I going to get this into the Winlink system? Winlink has mail servers out in the cloud. They're on Amazon Web Services right now. And that's where your message will eventually end up if you're sending a Winlink email message. It's going to go into that cloud, but you've got to get to that cloud somehow. Well, if you're sitting at home, or if I'm sitting here right now, where we have Wi-Fi connection, we have internet capability, I can just send it over the internet if I want to. It doesn't really have to go out over radio. So if you have that available, then great. You might as well go ahead and use it. Why clog up the airwaves sending a message when you don't really have to? You can send it over Telnet, which would basically go out directly into the servers over the internet. But the whole point of Winlink is that it has the ability to send these emails via radio, and that's where, as hams, we kind of get our jollies, and we like that. It's fun, it's enjoyable, and we know how to do that. So that's where you have to start making a decision as to how you're going to send this. So if you're not going to send it by Telnet and over the internet, you have to think about, how am I going to get this via radio to those servers that are out there on the internet? So there's a little more thought involved versus doing just Outlook or Gmail. All right, well, is email available anywhere you go? How many here go places on a regular basis where you have no connectivity to the internet? Quite often. Obviously, you know, the pictures here, I mean, obviously these places would be a challenge. But there are places right here in town where I've gone where I don't have, you know, capability to get to the internet. Luckily in this building, it is. I'm sure you go to a lot of locations where, you know, you possibly don't have, you know, connectivity to the internet. But even in this building, luckily there's Wi-Fi here, so I'm able to connect and get an internet connection, and we're able to stream this over Zoom. But there's a lot of places I go just around town where I don't have an internet connection. My cell phone doesn't work. Try going downtown in some of the buildings downtown. Good luck. You're going to have trouble sometimes getting a good cellular connection in some of those locations. So you can't count on email being available anywhere. So the real advantage of Winlink is that with your radio, and it's a really powerful tool that you have at your disposal. As hams, you have the ability, once you learn how to do this, to be able to send an email to anybody, anywhere in the world, from pretty much anywhere on the planet, using HF, using VHF, and UHF. So that's a very powerful tool. Not everybody has that capability. You know, the general public, for the most part, they don't know. If they don't have a cell phone connection, or if they don't have Wi-Fi, you know, I don't know. How do I do this? You know, they just give up and say, I just can't do it. But as hams, that is a very powerful tool that we have at our disposal. And we should really take advantage of that if we can. Now, if you're involved in any kind of public events, if you're an ARES member, if you're an Oxcom member, if you're a RACES member, whatever the case may be, and you participate in public events, providing communications, if you help out in emergency communications, you really should know how to use Winlink, because this is by far and away the most popular, and at the current time, the best way to send messages via radio. There's really no other competing method of doing it. There is FL Digi. The FL programs do a pretty good job of that as well. The problem with the FL programs is that they don't connect natively to the internet, so you don't have that capability. It's all radio. That's it. But they have a form too. You can load up a message form. It has the to, the from. It's a formal message. It looks just pretty much like any other email. So you can use FL Digi and send messages as well over radio. But Winlink gives you quite a bit more flexibility versus FL Digi and FL Message. So really Winlink is probably the most popular way to go, just because it gives you all of these options. You don't have to do radio if you don't want to. You can do the internet. And then if you do radio, it gives you a lot of options on how to do it via radio. So basic points about Winlink. Number one, it's email-like messaging tool, where I talked about that, so it's very easy to learn. It's designed to work with amateur radio. That's kind of that's one of the things it was really meant to do at the very beginning. Winlink was developed in the early 1980s, about the time when packet radio was also becoming popular. And so the two merged together real well. And at first, Winlink was just radio only, because in the 1980s, did you have internet email? Not really. Most of us didn't have that. So it didn't really exist. So the best way for Winlink to work then, and the only way it could really work, was over radio. And packet radio was hot at that particular time. Everybody was getting into it and playing with it, and it was fun. I remember those days. It was great. To me, it was a lot of fun, right? You'd connect. Everybody'd have these different BBSs you could connect into, and leave messages and retrieve messages, and it was a lot of fun. So Winlink kind of developed in that atmosphere. Well, as the internet kind of grew, and internet email started to become popular, Winlink could kind of see the writing on the wall and said, we better take advantage of this new internet email system that's popping up everywhere. So they kind of revamped their program and so forth, and it really kind of became what's called Winlink 2000. And with Winlink 2000, I just leave off the 2000, so when we talk about Winlink, we're not talking about the old Winlink. It got revamped. Guess what year? About 2000. And it started to use the internet and take advantage of that. And that's where it now gave you two ways of sending the messages. You could do it by radio, or you could do it by the internet. So Winlink has tried to keep up with some of the advances in how to communicate with one another. So to their credit, they didn't just ignore the internet and say, oh, we're just radio only. We don't care about that internet thing. They said, well, we probably ought to give them the ability to communicate via the internet if that's possible. So we just leave off the 2000. There is a thing called Winlink Classic that I think is still around. Chris, do you know if that's still around? Or yeah, okay. But we're talking about Winlink 2000, which is the more modern version of Winlink. Winlink obviously is just an excellent tool for emergency communications. It's pretty obvious. If you work in the incident management world at all as a volunteer, you're going to be familiar with ICS forms. The ICS 213 is an official form in the incident management system, and it's basically an email is what it looks like. Again, it's a to, a from, a subject, a body. They just arrange it in their own special way, and they call it their own special form. But it's basically an email. It's got all the same information that you would have in anything else. So Winlink can very easily send an ICS 213 form because it's just very much like an email. So Winlink works really great in the emergency communications world. A good thing is the software is free. Doesn't cost you anything. Service is free. That doesn't cost you anything. Why would you not take advantage of this if it's available to you at no charge? It's kind of a no-brainer. And so everybody who's involved in emergency communications or in public service events should learn Winlink and should know how to send messages via Winlink. It's a great tool to have. A couple of acronyms within Winlink that I just want to bring up real quick. And I don't know, how many people, anybody here just ever seen Winlink before? Okay. Okay. Well, we'll kind of then go over just the general of how Winlink is structured, just to kind of help you out. Most of you probably already know this stuff, so just kind of bear with me here as we go through some of these acronyms. But you've got an RMS, which is a radio message server. You've got CMS, which is the common message server. And you've got P2P, peer-to-peer, which we're not going to talk about too much tonight or today. We're going to kind of try to concentrate just on Winlink messages. Winlink can send messages from one ham to another ham. That's called peer-to-peer. There's no internet involved. But we'll talk about that's kind of like a whole separate subject. Just know that it can do that. We're going to talk about Winlink messages, and a Winlink message basically is going to assume that it's going to go to that mail server that's out there on the internet. And you're just using radio to get from your computer to another radio and computer setup that is attached to the internet. And that's how you end up getting your mail out to that server that's out on the internet. So that's kind of the difference between a Winlink message versus a peer-to-peer type message. And when we bring up Winlink here in a second, you'll see where you set that difference. But we're going to talk about Winlink mail today. But the CMS, the Common Message Server, that is the mail server that Winlink has out on Amazon Web Services. That is the mail server where all your messages end up going to. RMS, Radio Message Server, is that gateway that exists with a radio on it that allows you to connect via radio to that RMS station, which then it has an internet connection out to the CMS. So that means you, as an operator, if you're out in the middle of the forest, if you're who knows where, if you can get into an RMS station, then you can get an email to anywhere in the world without you personally having to have an internet connection at your location. So that's the big, powerful strength of how Winlink works. And there's a lot of RMS stations out there, and they're all volunteers. These are all hams who are spending their own money, spending their own time to put up these stations. They don't get paid anything for this. So you should thank those people because there's a lot of them out there, and they all spend a lot of money on some of these setups. And some of them are on HF, some of them are on VHF and UHF, some are on both. So yeah, I mean, these guys, they like doing what they're doing, and they'll spend the money on it. So thank them if you can, if you ever see them. So people like Willem and John, they all have their own RMS servers, and there's several others in our area, which we're very fortunate. We have some very good RMS servers in our area. Some people don't, so you should really appreciate what we have locally. So Winlink makes use of digital communication techniques to basically send and receive messages. So just kind of in general, obviously a computer is required to initiate and retrieve messages. Can you send messages, as we talked about with the datagrams or radiograms? You can send messages by voice. You can send them by CW. Doesn't require much, right? You just need the radio and your telegraph key, and you need a radio and a microphone, and you can send messages. When you start getting into digital communication and sending messages, you're going to have a computer. That becomes now another accessory that you're going to have tied in with your other stuff. So there is a little bit of overhead involved, hardware-wise, when making use of Winlink. But you know, we all pretty much have computers nowadays, right? But it is a requirement in order to do anything with Winlink. Winlink was designed to use radio as a transport medium from the very beginning. Like I said, it started out in the 80s, and it used packet radio, so it's always been radio-oriented. And a big part of it was used by sailors at sea back in the day before satellite communications made it relatively inexpensive to send communications via satellite. It was great if you were taking your sailboat out and you're going to go to Hawaii from California or something. Well, in the process, wouldn't it be nice if you could send messages back to people at home? And that's one area where Winlink became very popular, is for sailors to be able to send messages from their ships from places where there obviously was not going to be any kind of internet connectivity. So Winlink has always filled that void quite well in its existence. One thing to realize is that Winlink is not a digital mode. Okay, it's a service. It's not a mode. It's basically all Winlink is literally some hams and some other people got together to create this email system. And they're all volunteers too. You can contribute. They would like for you to contribute to help pay, because it costs money, obviously, to have servers on Amazon Web Services. It's not free. Amazon doesn't give you anything for free, despite what they try to make you think they are. You're paying for it one way or another. So, you know, they are, again, expending their time and effort to create this mail system for you. So it's a service. It's not a digital mode. How you access that service is through various digital modes. And there's various ways you can do that with Winlink. Some of those would be AmTor, PACTor. If you're not familiar with these particular digital modes, don't worry about it. There's plenty of information out there on the web to explain how these different modes work. Packet radio, obviously, is another way for it to communicate. Always has been and still is. And then there are several software programs. If Winlink has to run on a computer, well, you're going to have a software program on here that gives you that interface to where you can input your message and then get it to the Winlink system. And so you have to have software running on the computer to make that happen. And there's various software packages out there. Winlink Express is one that Winlink does themselves, and it's probably the most popular package out there. But there's others. Airmail is one that's been around for a very long time, and it's a good program. It does a good job as well. You also have Outpost, PAT-Link, and I think Chris is going to talk about PAT a little bit later, which is kind of interesting because PAT can run on just about any platform out there. You've got PAC-Link, and you got a new one called WOAD, which runs basically on your Android phone. So it's rather new, still a little bit rough around the edges from what I've seen, but it's getting there. They're doing better, and so it's something you can actually do from your phone. Winlink Express, which is the most popular software program out there, is free. You just download it from the Winlink website, and it gives you this interface into inputting messages and retrieving your messages. One problem some people would say about it is that it's Windows-based, and it's only Windows-based. And they don't seem to have any inclination to make it work on Linux or any other operating system at the current time. That could change, but at the current time, it's pretty much Windows-based. Now, you can run Windows programs on Mac if you're a Mac person. You know you can run Windows on a Mac, and so you could use a Mac for that, but it's not going to run on your Raspberry Pi, as is. Not easily, anyway. There are some people who can get it to work, but it's a bit of a challenge. So that's kind of one thing about Winlink Express that some people don't like, is that it's very much Windows-oriented. But most people have a Windows computer, let's face it. I mean, if you're going to go out to Micro Center or Best Buy and buy a laptop, guess what it's going to have? It's probably going to have Windows as the operating system. If you walk in there and ask, hey, can I get a Linux-based laptop? They may look at you a little bit strange and say, nah, no, sorry, we don't have that. So most of us have a Windows operating system PC, so it's really not that big of a problem.
Gary?
Yep.
Obviously, all of these programs will send a message to any of the other programs.
Yes.
The difference is the look and feel.
Right.
So if we're going to an Aries event and somebody just sits down, it's not a totally different user interface.
No.
What are most Aries groups, public service events, are they using any one particular of these?
Winlink Express is by far and away the most popular.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
without a doubt. Yeah. In fact, I think last week or something, I took a sample of 1,000 messages that had been sent over Winlink. Just you can take a snapshot and look at 1,000 messages, and it'll show you what the person used, what software program they used. It was like 800 some of them were Winlink Express out of that 1,000.
So if we are a Mac person, like I'm sitting in front of Mac, don't go and find like Packlink Unix or something. Get the wine or
Get
the
wine,
Parallels
right.
and run Winlink Express.
Yeah, I think that's the
So
way
that
most people
we
do
stay
it.
on the mainstream. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, but they all look kind of the same. Now WOAD is a little different because it's on your phone, so it starts to get a little bit different there in the way it looks. But a lot of these others, again, they're very similar. Yeah.
I'm probably not going to hand my phone to somebody
No.
Aries or Oxcom deployment, but I might hand this
Sure.
computer
Yep.
and say, here, I'll leave this with you.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so if you're going to learn one, definitely do Winlink Express. Just get familiar with it. And then you can branch off and do the other. PAD, I think, is very interesting. I think it's got a lot of potential. And it's cool because you can run it on a Raspberry Pi or something like that. So it makes it kind of fun, for one thing, if you like playing with that stuff, which I do, and I think a lot of people do. It's cool. It's a fun little program to play with. But it's different than Winlink Express for sure. But definitely learn Winlink Express if you can. All right, well, let's take a look at this real quick. This is just kind of a little diagram that kind of shows you in the most simplest form here that if you're the Winlink operator down there on a laptop and you're running one of these software programs that we just looked at, you can obviously get to the CMS servers. Again, the CMS server, that common message server is Winlink's email server, and it's out there on Amazon Web Services or AWS. Well, you can get to it through just Telnet. So I'm hooked up with Wi-Fi right now in here, and so I can connect to Amazon just right here over Wi-Fi. I don't have to have a ham radio or anything. I can just go right out there and no problem. It's quick, it's fast, works great. Again, if you have that available to you at an event, or if you're at an EOC and you're handling an incident, help out, then if you have internet access, go ahead and use it. Why not? It's not like we have to use radio. And one thing we'll look at here in just a bit is that if you do it over radio and you're communicating back to one of those RMS gateway stations, well, you're doing that over the air, and they're on one frequency. And so you're occupying that frequency during the time you're sending that message back and forth. Well, what if there's multiple people that need to access that RMS? Okay, you start to drop that throughput because you may have to wait while somebody else is using it, right? Because it's radio and we're on one frequency, and so you need to kind of think about that. So if you have internet available, just use it, because that way you're not tying up that RMS gateway because somebody else might have to use it because they don't have internet access. So that's something to always keep in mind. If you can do it by internet, just go ahead and do it. It's easier and it's faster. So in this particular diagram here, it's very simple. You just you're connecting to your internet service provider, which then goes out to the servers, and you send and retrieve your messages through that communications path. Now, when radio gets involved, the diagram starts to get a little more complicated at this particular point. So this kind of shows you as the Winlink operator on the right-hand side, and you're going to connect that to a radio. And the radio is going to have a sound card interface. It may be built into the radio. A lot of the current new rigs have sound cards built into them, which is really nice. Makes it much easier. You just basically have a USB cable that comes out of the radio, goes right to your computer, and it shows up as your sound card interface that you select, and that's how your audio gets sent back and forth between the computer and the radio. Now, not all radios have that. Most of them don't actually still. So you're going to have an external TNC or sound card interface between the laptop and the radio. And it's going to serve that functionality. So this diagram is the simplest in that it doesn't show that separate sound card interface. But there's things like Signal Link. USB is a very popular interface. The DRA interfaces have become very popular. So that's another one that basically is just an external sound card for your laptop. And what it does is just interface between your laptop and the radio. But in this particular case, nice and easy. This is a nice little ICOM radio here life is good because you just hook up to it with your USB and you're good to go. And the radio then transmits out to the RMS gateway station that's over on the left-hand side. Well, they just have the opposite setup, basically, a very similar setup. They're going to have a computer, and they're going to have it tied to a radio. And so you're going to talk to each other over that radio, whatever frequency that is. Could be HF, could be VHF, could be UHF, whatever the case may be. And then that RMS station is going to have the internet connection that goes back to the CMS servers. And so that's how your path gets from you as the Winlink operator to the CMS servers. And then it works the other way back around again. You know, it comes back just the opposite direction. So very simple setup. Works great for the most part. If you're on HF, obviously you got to deal with all the HF propagation situations. And you know, may not be as reliable as VHF and UHF for sure. If you've got a good connection on a VHF or UHF channel, then man, life's good at that point, because you can probably get into it 24/7, 365 days a year. As far as propagation goes, it's not going to really affect you that much. But on HF, yeah, you know, it gets a little trickier at that particular point in time. You got to be familiar with HF. You got to be familiar with propagation and how propagation works. And propagation's constantly changing every day. And today could be totally different than it was yesterday. It could be totally different tomorrow. You just don't know in HF. It's kind of a challenge. But there are some features in Winlink Express software, which I can show you here in just a bit, that makes HF a little bit easier for you, because they go out and they look at the propagation, what the current propagation is like, and they can kind of guess based on where you are what RMS gateway stations might be good for you to connect to. So they kind of do that work for you. And of course, you got to have an internet connection in order to get that current information, unfortunately. Or you can actually get it over the radio, but it really clogs up the channel when you do that. But that's kind of cool. So for the HF side of things, they can kind of predict what stations near you will be the best for you to connect to. So this is a basic message flow, and various ways of doing it. Up there at the top, on the top left, you're the message operator, for example. You can connect to the CMS servers, as we've talked about, either RF or directly with Telnet out to that CMS server. If you're going to do RF, you're going to go through that Winlink RMS Gateway that you see there in yellow. And it's going to be on HF, or it's going to be on VHF or UHF. Goes out to the CMS server, and that message just sits there in the server. It doesn't go anywhere. It just sits there. You've sent that message, and you've addressed it to either another ham with Winlink, or you've addressed it to just a regular email address. It's going to go out and sit on that CMS server. Unless you send it to somebody with just a regular email address, in which case it's going to send it to whatever the mail server is that person is using. So if they have a gmail.com, or if they have a outlook.com or hotmail.com or yahoo.com, then the CMS server will go ahead and communicate with those servers and dump the message into that person's email address on that server. But if you're sending it to another ham operator who has a Winlink account, your email is going to go out there and just sit on that CMS server. And it's going to wait for that person that you sent it to, for them to connect to the CMS server. And it says, oh, okay, I have a message for you. And then it dumps the message down to that person. It doesn't automatically just send it to that person. There's no way, it can't, because that person may not be set up, they may not be operating at that particular time. A lot of us leave our computers at home on 24/7, right? They just sit there. So it's your little Gmail or your Outlook is going to go out regularly and check, do I have any mail, do I have any mail, do I have any mail? You go walk up to your computer, and oh, I got all these emails here ready for me. Well, it kind of did that automatically in the background while you were off doing other stuff, right? And you can do that with Winlink to a certain degree. It's just not going to check as often as it does when you're using Outlook or Gmail. But Winlink can do the same thing. You can set up your Winlink station at home, have it running the Winlink Express software, and you can tell it every 15 minutes, go out and see if I have any messages. And it'll do that. And if you have a Telnet connection, that makes it nice and easy. It's just over the internet. So it just goes out and it checks every 15 minutes or hour. You can set it for whatever you want. It'll go out and just make that connection and see if you have any messages. And in the meantime, if you've created any messages for somebody, you can just put it in your outbox. It just sits there. And then when it goes out and makes that connection, it'll send whatever you have in your outbox to that CMS server at that particular point in time. So it's kind of an important thing to realize that that message is sitting out there on the server, okay, in the cloud. It's not automatically just going to go to the person. That person that you send it to has to connect and retrieve it. It's kind of a manual operation or that every 15 minutes or whatever, it can automatically go do it. But nevertheless, it has to make that connection, which is really no different, again, than Gmail or Outlook. They all do the same thing. They just do it more often. You know, they'll just go check every 30 seconds or every minute or every 3 minutes. It just does it more often with that particular software. But that's the kind of the flow right there, and the various ways that you can basically get a message to somebody else. So as we talked about, there's various Winlink message types. There's 3 actually. One's called a Winlink message. That's the one we're kind of talking about today for the most part. There's the peer-to-peer messages, which again are from one ham to another ham. It doesn't go over the internet at all. It doesn't go to those CMS servers. You're just sending a message from one ham to another ham. And so that's called a peer-to-peer message. And then you have a radio-only message, which is rare. You know, those aren't used very often, and so we're not going to talk about those at all. All right, when you go into Winlink Express, this right here is kind of a GUI, or the graphical user interface that's within Winlink Express. And in this particular GUI, like I said, when you create that email, and you filled it all out, you filled out that form, you fill it all out, and you say, post to the outbox. It's just going to sit there in your outbox. It's not going to go anywhere at that particular point in time. This is where, again, you have to make that decision. Well, how now do I connect to a CMS server so that it will send that message out to those CMS servers? And when you go into the software, there's this open session drop down that you see up there on the right-hand side. And you'll see a whole list of ways you can get to that CMS server. And the top part there that has the red outline, all those have Winlink on the end of the name. That assumes that you're sending a Winlink type message. Remember, there's a Winlink type message, there's a peer-to-peer type message. They're 2 different things, and actually they're not compatible with each other. A peer-to-peer message is structured a little different than a Winlink message is. So you can't intermix the 2. If you're sending a Winlink message to somebody, then they have to retrieve it as a Winlink message. If you're sending a peer-to-peer message to somebody, they have to be in peer-to-peer mode as well in order to receive it. Yep.
Wait a second, but can you explain the difference between the radio only? I mean, is it similar? I mean, it's, you know, it's still like a peer-to-peer connection, but what's the difference between, and I did read the, you know, on your slide, but I don't have a good understanding of the radio only packet.
Yeah. Frankly, I have never used radio only in all the years I've been doing Winlink. Radio only, from the way I understand it, is if the internet was down completely. So if that RMS gateway station that you communicate with does not have access to the internet, this would be a very bad situation. Let's face it, if the entire country had no internet connectivity, right? There's something pretty major going on that would be bad. But the system is actually set up so that that RMS gateway station can receive your message, just like you normally would. You'd send it to them. Well, if they realize, hey, I don't have internet connectivity, they can be set up to actually then go out and connect with another RMS gateway station that you know, through RF, so it's not going over the internet. And you go in and you basically pick which RMS stations you want to send to. Say you want to send a message to, you know, East Coast, somewhere on the East Coast. Well, you can go in and set up which RMS gateway stations you want that path to follow over RF. It's not going to go through the internet at all, but those RMS gateway stations have to be set up to be able to do this. And so it really slows things down, obviously. I can't imagine this ever really being a successful way to do this, because if you look at the number of just Winlink messages that happen on a daily basis, it's quite a few. You know, there's a lot of messages going through Winlink. And so if you tried to picture all that's going over the internet right now, it's just being sent by radio. And when you're talking HF, you can be talking some pretty slow bit rates, just because it's HF, you know, and you can't have a really high bit rate between stations. It's going to take a long time to send some of these messages. And then it's got a relay, maybe. It may go through 2 or 3 RMS stations before it finally gets to a location where that person you sent the message to can connect to that RMS gateway that's local to them and retrieve the message. So radio only is just what its name sounds like. It's not using the internet anymore. Those RMS gateway stations are now talking over radio to each other. And it's really going to bog things down. So hopefully we're never in a situation where that's the way it has to be for everybody. And like I said, if that ever happened, we probably got other things to worry about. So Does that make sense? Or?
Yeah, that does make sense. So you know, if you wanted it, if you didn't have internet, you had 2 or 3 stations in an event or something that was set up, you could have an RMS station, and kind of from a small group, 2 or 3 or 6 different stations, it would work for that.
Yeah, or if you're talking an event that's pretty localized, I would probably go to peer-to-peer at that point, maybe, because with peer-to-peer you can digipede through a station, just like you can with packet. With packet you can digipede through 2 or 3 stations that are on a higher location to get to where you need to go. So I would just do peer-to-peer at that particular point in time, because and you can still send Winlink. You don't have to do the radio only. Just take advantage of digipeders if you have that. That's where you got to know, well, what's available to me. I don't know. If you don't know what digipeders are available in your particular area, then that becomes a little challenging, right? Because you don't know the call signs of the stations to digipede through. So, and I don't know, John, do you have yours set up on HF to do radio only?
I do have mine set up sometimes to do radio only, but doing the failover is not the most intuitive and not the most predictable thing in the world. Your mileage may vary. It's kind of flaky, kind of weird. There's some people that have figured it out, but it's smarter than I am, and I've been doing it for 6 years. So yes, I can do that if necessary, but I don't normally leave that functionality active, because most of the time it will try to forward over HF, even if it has internet. And that can really chow your PAs pretty quick. So I kind of turn it off and go to normal mode most of the time.
Yeah. John?
Yeah, there's an RMS station. There's an RMS station down in Colorado Springs, and they were operating radio-only mode. They had that available. However, a lot of people who are connecting to their RMS station were abusing it and forcing radio-only mode when internet was available. And as John says, it chews up your radio. So it has been disabled at that station because it's misused by the client population.
Okay. And that's why we really don't talk about it too much, because from what I can see, it probably is not going to be the most efficient way. But if things really were, yes.
Gary, we have a question through Zoom from John NK0R. He's got a question: is the protocol to connect via internet to CMS server actually Telnet, or are they using the more modern SSH?
No, I do believe it is Telnet.
It is Telnet.
Yeah, if you see on the drop-down list here, it's up at the very top of the red area there. It says Telnet Winlink. You'll notice there's also a Telnet P2P. You go, well, how does that work? Peer-to-peer. If peer-to-peer doesn't go out to the CMS server out on Amazon Web Services, how does Telnet peer-to-peer work? Well, that's a great tool to actually use if you have like a mesh network set up or a private network like John has done here, Rocky Mountain Ham has done, where you can set up private microwave networks, where you've created your own little network, and you can just use Telnet within your own little network. So that's how you can use Telnet peer-to-peer, because you're not really going out to the CMS servers. You're just doing it yourself over your own private network. We could set up 2 computers here to there with an Ethernet cable, and we could communicate peer-to-peer on Telnet. Well, I don't think you can use SSH, number one, over the air. Yeah, that's a violation. So
Another question.
There is some primitive authentication involved, but there is no encryption involved.
right. So the red area up there at the top, again, these are all the Winlink type message formats. These are the ways you can send a Winlink type message. You can send it by Telnet, you can send it by packet, PACTOR, robust packet, which I don't think too many people use that anymore. RDOP is kind of fading away as well. VAR HF and VAR FM. VAR is kind of the new kid on the block that everybody likes to use now. It's become very, very popular. It works quite well. It's almost doing as good as PACTOR. PACTOR has always kind of been the king as far as being able to get a message through really lousy conditions. And PACTOR works really well. But unfortunately, the TNC that you got to buy to work PeertoPeer costs quite a bit of money if you buy it new. So it's pretty darn expensive. So if you want to spend more for your TNC than you do your radio, then you can definitely do PeertoPeer. And it works quite well, and it's been around for some time. But VARA is coming up, and it's doing quite well. And it's purely a software-based piece of software that uses, again, just a sound card interface to do the communication. So you don't have the expensive TNC. So I think that's one reason VARA has become so popular, because number one, it's doing extremely well in bad conditions on HF, and it doesn't cost much. You can get the software for free, or if you pay a little bit of money, you can get it to where it'll actually do it at a higher speed. So it can cost you a little bit of money for the piece of software. So it just depends on if you want to spend the money so you can go a little higher speed. Then you can pay the $70 or something like that, I think it is, for the license for VARA. And it's good for life at that point, if you spend that money for VARA. So VARA is probably the hot kid on the block, I would say, from what I've seen. People are really enjoying it. And VARA, you can use it on both HF and you can use it on VHF and UHF. That's why you see just VARA HF and VARA FM. The FM is different than the VARA HF. They are not compatible. They are a little bit different. They don't talk to each other the same. So if you're going to use VHF and UHF, you're going to use VARA FM. If you're going to use HF, you're going to use the VARA HF, because they're just different protocols, because VHF and HF are totally different as far as propagation conditions and so forth. So the software is completely different. I highly recommend VARA, and if I were you, I'd pay the extra money. It's worth it, especially on VHF and UHF. The speed difference is substantial, because once you pay that, and the license is good for both HF and VHF and UHF. So you don't have to pay a license for the HF and a separate license for the VHF, UHF. It's just one license for both. And he's constantly updating that software. And so, it's good. It's a good mode to use. But I like PeertoPeer too. I still kind of like the TNC feel for whatever reason. So PeertoPeer is a really good mode to use as well on HF. Does a real good job. Yeah.
Something you said, earlier with the when you could download the updates on the frequencies that you can use. Is that something that's manually set up, that when you turn up an RMS, that you fill out a form and it shows up there, or does it look at how things are? Where does that list come from for, like, hey, here's the HF frequencies, here's the whatever, and you can pick to connect to?
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a cool feature. Yeah. And John will show you how that works. But yeah, it's a very, very nice. I use that a lot on HF. In fact, the first thing I do, if I go do some HF Winlink, that's one of the first things I'm going to do. If it's 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, for example, I'm going to go download from that feature which HF stations are probably going to be best for me for Saturday at 4 p.m. And of course, this is always changing, because Saturday at 10 p.m. is going to be totally different, right, than it is at 4 p.m. At 4 p.m., it may give me 20 meters, stations that are probably going to have the best chance of being connected to. At 10 p.m., it's probably going to give me 40 meters or 80 meter stations that I connect to. So it's smart. It kind of knows where you are, and it knows what the propagation conditions are currently, and it knows what time of day it is, so it gives you the best guess. And it's amazingly pretty darn accurate. I've been surprised. All right, anyway, still on this list here, if you look in the green area, those are the peer-to-peer. It's the exact same methods. These are the digital modes. When we talk about digital modes, it's Telnet, packet, PeertoPeer, robust packet, RDOP, VAR HF, VAR FM. Those are the modes that you're going to be using. And peer-to-peer has those exact same modes. It's just that you're going from station to station instead of out over the internet. And then you have Telnet Post Office down at the very bottom, which is kind of another unique one, which is kind of fun. You can run a special software called RMS Relay. Again, it's free. You can load that on a computer. And basically, it almost becomes a little message server just to itself. And that is really cool on like mesh networks and so forth, again, private networks, where you can basically have a PC running that RMS Relay software, and an operator anywhere that can contact into that system can send a message just to that mail server, and it'll just sit there. You're not going out over the internet. You've kind of created your own little mail server. It's kind of a crude little setup, but it works really well. And it just stores that message. It's a store and forward type situation. So somebody sends an email to it, a Winlink email to it, and it just sits there. And then the recipient, again, connects to that same server and retrieves it. And this can all be done over your own little private network. You don't need the internet at all. So it's kind of a way to create your own little private Winlink setup. It's not as full featured, you know, it's not going to give you propagation predictions or anything like that. But it's a way to basically create your own mail server. This would be great for like public service events where maybe you set up your own system, right? And you just want to have a common area to store messages. Well, you can do that without even messing with any of the other Winlink setup that goes out over the internet. Does that make sense? But that's what that bottom one is. I kind of like that one. It was really fun to play with. And it was kind of developed a lot for mesh networks and so forth. And it works well. All right, we'll go through these real quick. These are pretty obvious. We've kind of talked about a lot of this stuff. But the Winlink message flow is very basic. You've got an originator. A lot of times, especially in the emergency communications world, the originator is not us. We're just communicators. So we're just kind of like the middleman. It's going to be possibly the person running the EOC at that particular time. May want to get a message over to somebody else that's at a hospital or whatever. And as ham operators, we're just the in-betweens. We're just doing that communications path for them. So when you're going to do this, you got to ask yourself a number of questions. And the first one is, well, what's the best communications path for Winlink messaging? And somebody gives you a message. And the answer to that is, well, it depends on many factors, as we've kind of talked about. It depends, am I going to go over HF? Am I going to go over VHF and UHF? This is where you have to make that decision when you're going to send a Winlink message. How am I going to send it? It's not as easy as that. Just click on send in Gmail or Outlook, where you have no control over how that gets sent. Somebody else has set that up for you. It just does what it does, and you have no control over it. But with Winlink, you have control over it and how you're going to send that message. So that's one of the first things you have to figure out, and how am I going to send that Winlink message? And we've already talked about the Winlink type message. As we've talked about, we've kind of gone over this already, but if both parties have internet connectivity, well, why not just use Telnet on both ends? Why clog up a radio frequency if you don't have to? So if both ends have internet connectivity, just use Telnet. Makes life a whole lot easier. Very, very simple. If one side does have Telnet and the other person doesn't have a ham there, but they have a regular old email address, this is one of the big advantages of Winlink over any other. I don't know any other ham radio software that does this, a system that does this. So this is what makes Winlink one of the more popular programs to use, is because we can send it to Telnet via Telnet to the internet, and we can send it to any email address out there in the world. And the CMS server will take that message that you brought in over Winlink and just send it to Gmail or send it to Outlook.com or Hotmail.com, Yahoo.com. It doesn't matter. It'll be able to send it to that person. So it does that translation from Winlink to a regular email address.
Or can the recipient that's a non-ham reply to it?
They can. It gets a little tricky if it's initiated from the person that's just out there on the email address. There's a special trick you have to do to make that work. You have to kind of address the email properly, otherwise Winlink is going to reject it. Winlink does a really good, I have never seen a single spam email ever in Winlink. They do a really good job of filtering stuff out that's not meant to go on there. Yeah, you don't have to worry about, up to this point, you've never had to worry about any kind of Winlink email coming in that's spam. If you get in a message, it's from somebody who intentionally meant to send you a message that's legitimate. It's not going to be, you need to buy this or that. No one's really doing that.
So, just a thought here. I'm a ham. I send this through whatever, Winlink Telnet or radio. It goes into the server.
Mm-hmm.
The server then sends it to a non-ham.
Mm-hmm.
I put a message over amateur radio. I'm licensed to do that. Everything's good. They'd hit the reply button, and there's ways to keep the spam out. They're sending a message back, and it's only going over the internet to the server, at which point I'm initiating a session as a ham and pulling it down.
Right.
So it's under my license again.
Yes.
So this is not the case that we've heard of. A ham sets up a radio at their house, using a very bad basic example, and somebody keys the microphone and is controlling the radio on their end, or automatically sending an Echolink control that turns your radio on without a control operator being present. It seems
Right.
like this is a very effective
It is.
control operator scenario.
It is.
And I'm deeming that I believe this is completely legal under Part 97.
Oh, yeah.
Am I interpreting this correctly?
I think you are, yes.
Okay,
This has
thank
never
you.
been a problem for anybody. That recipient, like I said, may have to structure his reply in a certain way. And I almost kind of don't want to say it here, but they can do it. And it will come back to you.
They have to know how to use the software. But there's a difference
Well,
in
there's-
knowing how to use the software to send a reply.
No,
and
they could
having
just
that
be using
reply
their
being
Outlook
legal.
or their Gmail or whatever. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
all they're using, because they're not hams.
Oh, that's true.
They're not going to have Winlink Express. They don't even know what that is, right? They don't care. They're just responding back within their world, which is going to be Outlook or Gmail.
But if they know the magic incantation, they will be,
Then it
it
can
will
get back
be
to you.
legal for me on the receiving
Right.
end, or anybody else that's on the receiving end, due to that function you said, hey, it's going to wait for you to turn your radio on and pull that. So
Right.
now I'm pulling it under my license, not pushing it under an unlicensed
Right.
person's.
Now, the content of their reply, you have no control over.
Sure.
You'd have to be a little careful there. But hopefully, that wouldn't be an issue. You don't
Okay.
want them to type something that might be
Perfect.
inappropriate.
Thank you.
Or send an attachment that might be inappropriate. And then they need to understand, and typically you wouldn't do this to just anybody. Hopefully that person you're sending it to kind of knows what's going on. So you don't want them sending back an attachment that's 20 meg in size. Number one, Winlink won't pass that. It's got a message limit size, so it won't even pass it anyway. So hopefully there's some understanding anyway. You'd probably be sending it to like somebody, Office of Emergency Management, maybe their personal email address or something like that. You just wanted to get a message to them to keep them informed of what's going on. So it's usually just not just a random person out there on the internet. Yes, Willem. Oh, sorry. Ooh, I better hurry. Okay, so here's just some other scenarios that we might run into in this particular case. You got one person who's got RF, the other person has Telnet, so no problem. Yeah, it doesn't matter. When it goes through a gateway, you can mix and match. They don't both have to do RF through the gateway. One could be doing Telnet, one can be doing RF. Doesn't really matter which way it goes, either direction. You could both be doing RF, which is a very common situation, and you're both going through two different Winlink gateways, because you might be here, say you were in Colorado, and you're communicating with somebody that's in New York or California, and you're going through a local RMS gateway, they're going through their local RMS gateway, and those two gateways combine together at that CMS server that's out there in the internet. Same thing in that situation. The one thing to keep in mind that when you are doing RF and everybody's going through one Winlink RMS gateway, be careful, because you will basically bog down that RMS gateway pretty quick if the activity begins to be heavy. It takes a while. Even with VAR FM, even at a pretty high speed, it still takes a while to send a message. It's not fast. It could take you 30 seconds. It could take you a minute, maybe, or even several minutes if you have a big attachment with it, to send that message. So it's going to be tying up that frequency. And then the person has to retrieve it, so they're connected to that gateway. Now, the same thing. You got a minute or 2 minutes that is going to be occupied while they receive it. And then somebody else needs to send something. So just kind of keep that in mind, that if you actually get in a situation where everybody's using one gateway, you're going to have to probably structure how you do this so that no one's tying up the gateway for too long. You're going to bottleneck, basically, if you overload it. And this is that post office mode I was talking about, using RMS Relay, the little software. Kind of shows the setup with an IP or a mesh network of some sort. And it's not going out over the internet at all. Basically, that little RMS Relay program is running, and it's what's storing the messages, and then people just connect within that private network to retrieve their messages and send them. And this is all just basic stuff. You can look at the slides, and it's all kind of common sense stuff, things you have to think about whenever you're sending a message. And these are all things that, as a ham radio operator, if you're going to do Winlink, you've got to ask yourself these questions, especially if you're in an emergency situation, or if you're doing an event, you have to kind of think these things through ahead of time, hopefully, So you can figure out, well, what's the best way I'm going to be able to send a Winlink message. And anyway, and here's a whole list of things. One thing that's on here that I wish everybody would do, if you're really interested in Winlink, just go out and practice it. Practice, 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 practice. Because if you don't practice, you're going to forget. We all forget, right? If we don't use something, what happens? We forget how to do it. Yeah. How many people forget passwords that you haven't used in 2 years? Probably a lot of us, most of us, right? So you got to practice Winlink on a regular basis. So I highly suggest that you go out and you practice, practice, practice. And make sure you're familiar with the software. And just real quick, before we leave, I was going to show you some of the software here real fast since I have an internet connection. Let me bring up Winlink Express. So when you bring up Winlink Express, this is basically what you see when you first start it up. This is the graphical user interface, or the GUI. You'll notice up here in the upper left-hand call, it's got my particular call sign. That's automatically filled in based upon how many calls you need in here. I have multiple calls just for grins. I have a -1, -2, -3 just for testing purposes. So you can go ahead and create more than one call. Got my wife's call in there as well. But this will normally come up. And wherever what call sign you last used, that's what's going to pop up in this field. So that's something when you do create multiple ones. If I come in here and I go to, oops, sorry, I'm in a session. Hang on one second. Close my session. If I go up here and I change this to PJB-1, it's a whole different user. So you notice all these messages changed when I switched between the two because it considers WB5PJB-1 as a whole separate user from WB5PJB. So in the Winlink system, yeah, two different people, it thinks, at that particular point in time. So you can create as many of these as you want. I don't think there's a limit, but I mean, practicality speaking, you got to have to limit it at some point. But when I closed the program, I started back up. If I started back up, it's kind of moved on me here since we hooked up to the system. You notice it went back to where it was, where I last left it, which is PJB-1, which could be dangerous because if I tell somebody, hey, send me a Winlink message, well, they send it to just WB5PJB, I'm not going to see it if I'm sitting here on -1. It's different users. So that's just kind of one of the gotchas you got to watch out for. So I'm going to go ahead and send it back to this. And then when you want to just create a message, it's so simple. You just go to Message, New Message, and here's that form. Very simple. Fill out your to, and if you're sending it to another Winlink somebody who has a Winlink account, all you just put in their call sign. That's all you have to put in. You know, nothing else involved there. So it's very, very simple. And you're going to send it as a Winlink message, or you're going to send it as a radio only, which again we don't really use very often, or a peer-to-peer. So you're going to pick a Winlink message or a peer-to-peer message. And this is very important because as I said, these are structured different when it actually goes to send the message. So if you're going to do a peer-to-peer message, and I type this all out and I go post it to the outbox, and then I do a peer-to-peer connection with somebody, well, if they're sitting over there and they've got theirs set up as a Winlink message type up here in this little box, they won't get the message because they're structured differently. It ignores it. So that's kind of a little bit of a challenge with Winlink that some people don't like, is that peer-to-peer is structured differently than a Winlink message. So it gets a little complicated. And this happens all the time. Even with people who've done this a long time, if you send a peer-to-peer type message to somebody through a gateway or something like that, or directly to them, well, if they're not set up in peer-to-peer mode, it'll connect, everything looks normal, nothing happens. No message was sent. You go, whoa, wait a minute, what happened just now? I just connected to that station. Why didn't it dump my email to them? Because maybe that message was set up as a Winlink type message and they're set up in peer-to-peer mode, or vice versa. So you have to agree, and that's one of the challenges with peer-to-peer mode, which makes it a little more challenging. You both have to know that you're in peer-to-peer mode, and you have to structure your messages as a peer-to-peer mode, or peer-to-peer message every time that you do it. It defaults to Winlink message, and that's what will get people. You know, you'll be in a hurry, other stuff's going on around you, right? You type in this message, you forget to change that Winlink message type to a peer-to-peer. You go to make a peer-to-peer connection with somebody, and it seems to go through all the proper actions, but it never sends the message because you've got that message set as a Winlink message type, but it needs to be set as a peer-to-peer. It's a little confusing, and that throws people off.
Is it still true that once you've posted it to the outbox, you can't change its type?
No, you can change it. Yeah, so I don't know, I'll do one here real quick. So again, if I close this out, even though I have this set to peer-to-peer right now, if I close this out and I go to open up a new message, it went right back to Winlink message. Even though I last had it as a peer-to-peer, it's like it always defaults to a Winlink message. But if I sit here and say, oh, I don't know, let's see, I'll send one to you there, Dick, WV0 UVA, whoops, UVA. Dick is sitting right here in the room, so I'll put his call in there. And I just say test, which you'll see, whoops, if I can spell. Hi, Dick, and that's it. I'm just going to say that. Now I'm going to post that to my outbox. Again, it doesn't go anywhere. The only place it goes is in my outbox. You'll see over here on the left, it shows a 1 next to the outbox. If you click on the outbox, it shows you, there it is. There's the message. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's just gone in my outbox. Because I now have to connect to the CMS servers to actually send it. Okay? So since I happen to have internet here, I've got this up here at the top on my open session. These are, again, those different choices, different ways you can actually send this message now. I'm going to just pick Telnet because I don't have a radio here hooked up, so I can't send it through a radio at the current time. I'm going to, we do, I don't know what this one is. So I'm just going to open this session, and I'm going to hit start. And it's going to go out and it's going to connect, and it just sent that message to Dick. Okay, and it'll tell you completed send of message, and it shows you that it sent a message. So this is just the normal process right now. Now it's sitting out there in the CMS servers. Well, Dick's sitting right there. Did you get any kind of notice that you got an email? No. He has no way of knowing that he got a Winlink message. He has to now go out and connect to the Winlink CMS server to retrieve that email that I just sent him.
Back to maybe Willem's question, or I misunderstood. But
Right.
if you create the message that is peer-to-peer, put it in the outbox, I guess you're saying that you can go back into the outbox and say, no, I don't want it peer-to-peer now. I want it to go to a Winlink Telnet.
Right, yes, you can do that. I'll just do it again here real quick. Message, any message, WB0EVA. I've got it set as Winlink message at the current time, right? Test 2. God, I can't spell test today. It's weird. 2 T's. We'll do 2 T's. All right. So say I post that to the outbox, right? If I go to my outbox and I open it back up, I can come up here and change this to peer-to-peer. And now it's a peer-to-peer. Yeah, just post it back to the outbox. And now it's a peer-to-peer. Once you send it, it's too late. But if I try to send this peer-to-peer right now, in fact, let's do that. If I just did a peer-to-peer, well, if I open up my Telnet session, and I'm under the Winlink type Telnet, if I start this, it's going to go out and connect just like it did before. Oop, it didn't send anything. Message sent 0. Why? Because that's a peer-to-peer type message, not a Winlink type message. And this gets people all the time, and this is one of the challenges between going from Winlink to peer-to-peer. That's why I think a lot of people kind of stay away from peer-to-peer for the most part, but it does have its advantages if you're, you know. Now, this would be an indication that I set that message as a peer-to-peer type message, but I'm making a Winlink type connection. It's expecting a Winlink type message, not a peer-to-peer type message. It's definitely a gotcha, and it'll fool people all the time. But anyway, that's the basic flows. You see how simple this is. There's really nothing complicated about this at all as far as just composing a message and getting it sent, especially if you just have an internet connection. It's really, really simple. This is very, very basic. Makes life just super simple. It gets a little more challenging than when you do RF, because now you got a radio involved. But you know, recently we had a Winlink exercise in our Aries group, and it was very interesting. The RF part, nobody had any trouble with at all. Worked great. The biggest problem, computers, and how the computer interfaced with that external sound card device. That's where the biggest problem was. And some of them, you just left scratching your head. I don't know why this isn't working, because no one can figure it out. But usually the radio part has hams. We're pretty good about that, right? We know how to set up the radio. We know how to put it on the right frequency. We know how to hook up the antenna and so forth. We know how to get into the RMS gateway station probably. And so the RF part, we've got down pretty good, I think, is hams. The challenge always comes into stuff that we have no control over. And a lot of times it's the computer.
That I've seen, because I don't always get on it, is your Winlink count expires if you
It
don't use
does.
it for a while.
If you don't
so
use
it's kind
it-
of good to practice and not just show up an event and not have internet and whatever.
Oh,
and figure,
absolutely.
My count's not active.
Absolutely. And that's all it took right there. Just doing this very basic thing over Telnet. It just reset me back down to starting from scratch with that WB5 PJB call. Okay, now I had to do that for my -1, -2, -3 as well, because again, those are treated separate calls. I just had to remember every once in a while to go just do a Telnet connection, and it resets the clock on those. But if you don't use it for, I think it's what, 400 days, then it's going to basically take your account away.
So you've got so with the way you had the -1 and the -2, those are all individual accounts
Yep.
that you go through and set up and authenticate and all of that with.
Yeah, yeah. And I know I'm over time, Willem, I'm sorry. Just want to show something real quick too that's kind of cool. If you go into settings here and you go under Winlink Express, oops, I'm sorry, I'm in a session again. Hang on, let me close this session. So if you go into your settings under Winlink Express setup, you can go in here and create tactical addresses and auxiliary call signs, but tactical is really handy. So what I could do is, if you're going to be doing an event, and you're going to be the trailer, or you're going to be rest stop 1, rest stop 2, whatever the case may be, you can create just temporarily a tactical address and put it in here, and it will associate it with your particular account. So my call sign could be associated with a tactical address. And then other people don't have to know your call sign, because it's hard sometimes to remember people's call signs, right? But a tactical address like rest stop 1, it's easy. People can remember that. So when they go to send a Winlink message, they can send it to rest stop 1, and Winlink will know to send it to your call sign. So when you log in, you'll see Winlink messages that are addressed to that particular tactical address. So that's a real handy thing that also Winlink provides, which is very, very nice. All kinds of fun things. This is just scratching the surface. There's so many things you can do in Winlink that we can talk about this the rest of the morning, but I know other people want to present. So, but there are so many things you can do in Winlink, and there's no other program out there that even comes close to doing what Winlink does right now at the current time. So who knows? There may be some competition show up one day that wants to do something better. And so we'll see. See what happens there. But there's a lot of things you can do inside this software. So I really recommend people get in and get familiar with this and play with it. It's all free. It doesn't cost you anything. So why not do it? Anyway, I know Chris wants to talk. So.
Well, and as John reminded us this morning, this is kind of what we've been standardizing on in Colorado areas. So it's very important that you become familiar with this piece of software. It is very powerful, but like everything else, computers are dumber than dirt. They will do exactly what you told them instead of what you wanted. So please join the exercises that we hold regularly and practice this. That's kind of the bottom line here. So thank you very much, Gary. Appreciate the time you put in. Very excellent presentation. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll do the next presentation. We've